The final consolidation of a Western European kingdom is going to happen in Spain. Now, Spain at this time is not even a unified country. As a matter of fact, it's a number of different kingdoms, independent kingdoms. Ultimately, for our story, though, the two kingdoms that will combine together to form Spain will be Castile and Aragon. Of the two, Castile is the wealthier, and it's actually led at this time period by Isabel I of Castile. She'll die in 1504. The important piece with her isn't so much that she's an able ruler, which she very much is, but also her marriage, because her marriage happens to the King of Aragon, Ferdinand II, who, as you can see, is a very handsome fella. Now, Ferdinand will outlive Isabella, but what's important to remember is during their lives, they never shared the kingdom. They always were separate king and queen of Spain. Their descendants, though, will actually hold both crowns. So that dynastic marriage is what creates unified Spain. So there again, you can kind of see, where those territories are at. But because they were second cousins, they had to have a special disposition to get married. And so Rodrigo Borgia, who was actually a bishop, I believe, in the Catholic Church, married them in 1469. Now, what's important with Borgia is he later on will become Alexander VI. He'll be the future Pope Alexander VI, who is going to be Pope during a time period which most would consider a low point in the Catholic Church, and the fact that Alexander VI, while he was Pope, actually had children, a son and a daughter, and he ruled the Vatican and the Papal States as his own kingdom. Right. So, little side note: he's a Spanish Pope, but definitely not a high point in the Catholic Church, and that itself will lead to the Reformation, which we'll talk about later. And so Isabella, using sound fiscal policies, will ultimately drive the Muslim Moors out of the southern part of Spain. And by doing that, by 1491, it really does consolidate their power. Okay, and so you can see there in the lower half of the map, that area that was controlled by the Moors. And the Moors, by the way, had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Ferdinand himself kind of goes on a number of different military campaigns in the hope of increasing his land holdings, and he does this periodically, both while Isabella's alive and then after she dies. To be quite honest, none of his little excursions outside really ever end up with anything. For instance, he fought against the Valois in France with his son-in-law, Henry VIII of England. Really didn't get much out of it. He fought in the Italian wars, didn't get much out of it. Okay, so he's always looking to increase his land holdings. Both monarchs used forced conversions and the expulsion of Muslims to create religious conformity. And so we'll see that you always hear about the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition is actually always an inquisition is always brought in by a monarch into an area. The Catholic Church itself does not impose the Inquisition. Instead, the monarch itself wants it there. And so Isabella brought the Inquisition in and did tortured Muslims and Jewish people for not being good Catholics in an attempt to consolidate power. Of course, there is some question as to how many people were actually killed during the Spanish Inquisition, and so there's a lot of history still out as to the full effect of the Spanish Inquisition. But what's important, in 1492 they issued this Edict of Expulsion, okay, of the Jews, also called the Alhambra Decree. And so at that point, Jews either had to convert or they had to leave the country. Those that left the country, of course, their wealth was taken up by the monarchs themselves. Now, it's interesting to note that also in that same year, a sea captain, Christopher Columbus, came to Isabella and Ferdinand with an idea of sailing west to get to India. So he believed through his studies that he could actually get to the west, to India, by sailing westward. Despite all the things you may have heard in previous years of schooling, most people believed the world was round at this time. Christopher Columbus's big claim to fame is that he believed the world was much smaller than previous ancient Greek historians and scientists had believed it to be. So that's what he was saying. Is he's saying the world was much smaller, and so because of that, they'd be able to get to India. Of course, we know that Christopher Columbus was wrong. The Earth was round, but you couldn't sail directly to India by going westward. Luckily for Christopher Columbus, there was a whole set of continents in the way, North America and South America. And so what's important with this part of the story is once that interaction with the New World occurs, of course, that's going to bring in tremendous amount of wealth into the Spanish monarchs. Okay? Wealth taken from the New World in gold, silver, and precious gems. And so, as I said before, even though they're married to each other, they're co-regents. They rule separately. Right? And so it will actually be Carlos or Charles who will be the first king of Spain, really, that rules both kingdoms under one person. Okay? So this Charles is known as Carlos I or Charles V. He is king of Spain from 1515 to 1556 with his mother known as Mad Johanna. When her husband died, she apparently went mad for the rest of her life, wore black, was in mourning. Really sad situation. And so Charles basically rules Spain. And then he's elected, if you can call it an election. He bought the election in 1519. He'll be Holy Roman Emperor from 1519 to 1556, which is very important because that 1519 date is just right after the Protestant Reformation is starting. And so he's the Holy Roman Emperor trying to put down this issue of this, upstart Augustinian monk named Martin Luther. And so very much of the Reformation is really political, and Charles V is definitely knee deep or even neck deep in all of that. And so Charles becomes one of the most powerful men in the entire world with the wealth coming from the New World. He's connected to actually three houses, major houses in Europe at the time. But his paternal grandfather was Maximilian I. Maximilian I had married Mary of Burgundy. If we go all the way back to Charles the Bold's daughter, same family. And so he'll actually have land in Flanders will be his. He'll be actually born in Flanders. He will be the Holy Roman Emperor, which means he'll have land over in the Germanic areas, and of course Spain. And so this Habsburg family becomes very, very powerful and sets off a series of wars known as the Valois-Habsburg Wars. That's the French kings, the Valois versus the Habsburgs. And so that's what we'll see throughout almost his entire reign as king of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor, is constant fighting with the Valois family. As the balance of power, shifts back and forth between the Valois and the Habsburgs. And so, with this, you should have a really good sense as to the dynamics that are occurring all at the same time within these Western European countries. Again, kings, monarchs are consolidating their power. They're taking the power of the state. It's becoming theirs. The army is under their direct control. They pay for the army. They raise their own taxes. They're issuing laws. They're keeping nobility weak. Any sort of legislative bodies, whether it be parliament or House of or the Estates General, is designed to be weak. They're trying to weaken it at every step so they themselves can have the power. And we'll see that continuing for the next several centuries in European history. And still today, in the 21st century, there are still a number of monarchs that legally are, the heads of government of their countries, although not the heads of state. There's no kingdom that's really ruled solely now, a powerful kingdom that's ruled solely by a king or queen in Europe.